I'm gonna actually hold up the book so everybody can see it, because it's really a breathtaking cover. And I have to say that we are in for a treat. I have been looking forward to this, as Peter and Jim know, for about 6 months, because we were all at a dinner party in East Hampton last summer, and Peter at the end sort of casually remarked that he'd written a book. And, you know, if you're a bookstore, if you're a bookseller, the minute somebody says that, your ears perk up. And I said, oh, so, you know, what is it and when is it? And he said, oh, it's a memoir. I've been working on it and I'm excited about it. It's coming out in December. And I said, oh my God, you know, the minute it comes out, we want to do an event, thinking maybe it would even be live. And then Jim was there. And of course, Jim is, as you all remember, is a great friend of the bookstores and has interviewed some other people. And Jim right away said, well, I'll interview you. And I thought, dynamite, this is just going to happen. And so here we are. And I couldn't be more excited to have Jim and Peter with us tonight. And this is also our last, we're closing out the year. This is BookHampton, R.J. Julia Wesleyan's last event of the year. So for a lot of reasons, it's a really special time to be together. So Peter, as you'll hear and everyone knows, internationally celebrated band leader. He started when he was 24. He's been around the world. He's played to presidents and kings and queens and celebrities and so on and so forth. And then, you know, fortunately, some of the rest of us have heard him at various times. And he, as you'll see when you read this book, it's right away engaging, because he goes in the hospital for something else. He has a stroke and then he recovers sort of, and then he has COVID. So a lot of things in a short period of time come crashing in. And as he's sitting there kind of in a hospital bed at home, he's kind of reviewing both keepsakes and boxes and stuff, and also his life and making sense of it in a different way. So there's a lot here. It's part memoir, but it's also a real kind of window into a glamour and society that's a bit long gone, but we've all kind of, you know, had seen in the movies or read about. So it's just a wonderful, endearing, and really heart-rendering book, also about, you know, what happens when things don't, you know, come crashing in and life gets disrupted, and you make sense of it, and here we all are. And Jim, who is, as I say, a dear friend of ours and is just a wonderful raconteur. He's been an assistant U.S. Secretary, United States Attorney for the Southern District. I do think you should be Secretary of something, Jim, at some point. So, when
I was in school, I was Secretary of class. It was the only thing I could be elected to.
So you know what? I'm going to edit the intro from now on and put that in. Yeah. He's done a lot of things, written several books, some of which, a couple of which we've had the chance to host events for Jim. And he's got his own show and he's broadly written. So I think there's just, you know, this will be great fun, a great conversation. We'll learn a lot, and we're all in for a treat. And I really do, Peter, want to thank you, for writing the book. Thank you for being with us and for agreeing to do this, and just sort of the serendipity of having you both, the chemistry between you and having you both want to do this is really an honor and a delight for all of us. So welcome. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jim.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you very much. I don't know, there's another Carolyn's, but BookHampton really should be called Carolyn's, because that's the room where it happens. But now we have Peter Duchin. It's really a marvelous jewel in the crown of BookHampton, because he's written this fabulous book. What an extraordinary book, Peter, right? Couldn't put it down. Face the Music. But, you know, if the truth be told, Peter, this is really your second memoir. The first was called Ghost of a Chance, which you wrote 25 years ago. Now, how many memoirs do you plan to write? And why is this memoir different from the other memoir?
4 or 5 more. No.
4 or 5 more. Good. I hope you do.
Hey, good luck.
You about all of
that. This is it. This is the most I can remember. Or the most I want to put on paper that I can remember.
So why are the two memoirs different, or are they different?
Oh, they're very different because the first memoir was really about everything that had happened to me in my life up to that point, which was the late 90s. And this is about two major events that happened to me and how I reacted to them. One being a heart attack, well, a stroke, and two being a bad case of COVID, where I was in a ventilator for 45 days, 47 days. And I wrote this memoir to really address the physical therapy I had to do afterwards and to maybe, hopefully, help other people who've had similar type of situations. Because when I had the stroke and I came home to my room, I had in the room all sorts of pictures, photographs of my mother and father, which I'd had all my life and carried wherever I went. My mother died when I was born. My father died, who was a famous musician, died when I was 12. So
That was Eddie Duchin.
Eddie Duchin, yeah.
He was a legend. He remains a legend.
And I didn't, I had in the first book, obviously written that happened, but I hadn't really delved into who they were. So as I lay in my bed, hopefully recovering from this stroke, I looked at these pictures, many by people like Cecil Beaton, and thought, God, I'd really like to know what they were really like. And so I investigated what they were, and I had a person help me, a wonderful writer called Pat Beard, who went and did some amazing research, and we found out all sorts of things about my father and my mother that I had no idea about. For instance, Jim, I want you to think of, let's say you walk down the street and pass your mother and you didn't recognize her at all, and she didn't recognize you. I mean, my mother died when I was born, so she wouldn't know who I was, what I was. I wouldn't know what she was. And so I decided it was really important to try and figure out more about them, which is why I really wrote the book.
Well, your parents came from two very different backgrounds, didn't they? Your mother was, I guess, what you'd call a society girl, very well known, very widely photographed, and she was a beauty. And your father had a very different background. He came from the ghettos of Eastern Europe. He came from a family that was quite musical, and he rose to be one of the most prominent and well-known musicians of his time, 30s and 40s. So what did you learn about the two of them and how they meshed?
Well, I learned about how they met, which was my father was playing in an incredible nightclub called the Central Park Casino, which was in the 20s and 30s in New York.
Was there gambling at the Central Park Casino?
It's nowhere near where the Tavern on the Green is. It was on the 72nd Street transfers. It was built by, well, it was a building that had been built by the Olmsted, who was one of the founders of the park, builders of the park. But the Central Park Casino was really made by Jimmy Walker, the mayor. And downstairs, they had this incredibly opulent, beautiful ballroom and dancing and dining. And upstairs, they had several rooms, one of which Jimmy Walker used for dispensing patronage or whatever, and the other of which he used for his mistress, which was very nice. And it was quite a place, apparently, which I'm reading about it. It was just amazing. And since it's been torn down, by the way. But so that's where my mother, who was there dancing, met my father on the dance floor, which is a hell of a place to meet, I must say. But,
well, Anita Luce, who wrote Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, was quoted as saying that your mother scampered out of the social register into the arms of Eddie Duchin.
that's absolutely right.
Is that how it happened?
Don't you love that scampered out? Yeah.
Oh, she was quite a dancer.
Well, she the point was my mother turns out to be a very unconventional, not at all a society lady. I mean, though she came from that background, unfortunately, she came from that background. That was all the money was spent, I'm sorry to say, but she was a very glamorous woman. What would you say? Where is glamour today, for instance?
Well, I wanted to ask you that because your name is always associated with glamour and society and style. And what does all that mean? What's the meaning of glamour, and what society are we talking about?
Well, when I first started, that was true. They called me the glamorous Peter Duchin, and it didn't mean anything to me. And now as I look at it, I don't think that glamour exists anymore. I think beauty exists, certainly, good living and whatnot, but it's a whole different thing. Can you think of a movie actress who is glamorous today?
Today? Well, not offhand.
See,
Not offhand. Can you think of one?
No, I can't really. I mean, it's a whole different life today. Glamour, I think, along with manners, along with several other things, has kind of disappeared. It's just gone the way of profit, money, bigger, rather, it's gone the way of all sorts of things that have a much deeper meaning, I feel.
Well, you were always thought of as a society band leader. You didn't object to that phrase.
What can I say?
What can you say by way of objection? But what society were they talking about, or were you talking about?
Well, I'll tell you, there is a certain type of music that you might call society music. And when I was hired to play at the Maisonette in the St. Regis for my first big job, I had no idea what society music was. I'd heard it, but I didn't know. I played jazz and I played Latin music because I was in Panama in the army. So I called the main society leader I heard of, called Meyer Davis, and I asked him, Meyer, what is society music? He said, Peter, well, I play for a wonderful society, all the top people in Philadelphia, around the country, everywhere. They're wonderful people. They mainly pay on time. I love them very much. But there's one thing that I decided about them, and that is that they don't have rhythm. I said, Meyer, you're a band leader. You're playing music for people to dance. What in God's name do you do with somebody who doesn't have rhythm? Well, he thought for a minute and then said, well, I thought about it and came up with the idea that, even though they don't have rhythm, they can walk. I said, oh, that's really good, Myra. Nice, Myra. Mm-hmm. And he said, so since they can walk, I play everything in march tempo. So when you think of it, it was just one of those things. That is a march tempo. Like, Colonel Bovey or something like that. So you might also, the other thing that happens in society music is people dance around and men swing their arms like that. And I was once playing at the White House and I saw President Bush, George Bush Sr., swinging his arms, because he danced very society, and he clipped somebody in the jaw with his hand. It went up, boom. And the guy who he clipped looked at him. He didn't know it was Bush. And he said, what? He screamed, and then he saw it was the president. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President." Rubbed his jaw. And
well, that's society.
That's society.
That's society. Now, do you think there's a difference in style, as a musical style, between the music that your father created and the music that you create?
Yes, I'd say that the music that we play, or I create, as you say, is more jazzy, more involved with jazz. My father was very involved with romantic music, and he used to say that he played for people, just looking into their eyes, that kind of thing. And he was very good looking. So I think people felt they connected to him on that level. I play much more jazz because I was brought up with that. I love jazz. And I mean, everything from ragtime to bebop and more. And we play a lot of rock and roll with my band. So I'd say that Dad would never touch rock and roll because he never touched jazz. So, which would have been the sort of thought further out than what he did. So that's the difference there. And he had a much better technique than I had.
Well, you mentioned the Maisonette at the St. Regis, and you mentioned how good looking your father was, as are you. And you said in the book, certainly, that he was very attractive to women, particularly in the period after your mother passed away. And tell that priceless story of the woman who came up to you at your piano in the St. Regis and mentioned your father.
That was great. She leaned sort of on the piano like that. And she looked deep. I'm playing away, right? And she looked deep in my eyes and said, I knew your father. And I said, "Oh, that's great. I'm so glad." She said, "No, I mean, I really knew your father." Well, what the hell am I supposed to say?
Well, did you miss a beat or a note, or did you just keep on playing?
I missed a few notes on that one, I'll tell you. And then one night we were playing for the 100th guest on Love Boat in California, who happened to be Lana Turner, a mystery guest. And we're playing at the Beverly Hills. No, it was the Hilton, Beverly Hilton. And there were all these other old guests of Love Boat. I mean, they were sort of actors and actresses you couldn't believe they were still alive, but they were very interesting, of course, to see. My band would go up and say, "My God, it's Turin Bay, he's still alive," that kind of thing. And I was going up to the bandstand when a very attractive lady said, "Peter, can I talk to you a minute?" And I saw this attractive lady sitting in a booth. I walked over and said, "Yes, nice to see you." She said, "I just wanted to say, I'm Dorothy Lamour, and I knew your father very well. We had a very good time." I said, "Well, I'm awfully glad to hear that, Miss Lamour." She was the one that, was with Bing Crosby and Bob Hope and the Road to Rio and all that.
Road to Morocco.
So, yeah, exactly.
Well, that must have been very interesting. Now, you yourself had occasion to meet many movie stars, starlets, and some of them you dated. It's related in the book, Audrey Hepburn. You had a date with Audrey Hepburn, didn't you?
Well, she was a blind date.
A blind date?
Yeah.
But didn't you have a hint you knew what she looked like?
Believe me, she's anything but blind. She would she was a wonderful gal, but my godmother knew her, had a couple of tickets to the opera, and said to me, I've got another woman who's going to the opera. Would you please go with her as an escort? I had no idea who it was. I rather thought it was somebody of the age of my godmother, so I was doing a favor. So when I showed up to pick up the young lady, it was Audrey Hepburn. And she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. No vestige of fame I mean, she didn't act like an actress. She was just very normal and very bright.
So did you see her again?
I saw her a couple of times.
Couple of times. So is there anything that you want to tell me?
No, I can't think of anything that would amuse you.
I think on that subject, almost anything you told me would amuse me. But let's go on. Audrey Hepburn was not the only one. How about Kim Novak?
Well, you know, there was that movie about my father.
The Eddie Duchin story.
Eddie Duchin story. And who should play my mother but Kim Novak? And so I thought that was rather interesting. I thought edibly that is a good choice for my mother. And I was at Yale at the time. So I said to a bunch of friends, want to go meet Kim Novak? And of course, everybody said yes. And we jumped into a car and steamed down to New York. They were filming in Central Park. And so we got into Central Park, and I saw that Kim Novak was being made up under a tree somewhere. She was standing there, and they were brushing her face, you know, with whatever. And so I walked over to her and put my arms around her from the back, gave her a kiss on the neck, and said, "Hi, Mom." And she turned around and said, "Oh, for Christ's sake," or something like that. And she was a wonderful gal.
Wonderful
Very
gal.
nice mother.
You saw her more than once.
Well, we became friends.
You became friends. So you knew Kim Novak.
She was a very nice person, very beautiful.
Very beautiful. Very nice person. Now tell about your early days. You after your father died, I think you were about 12 years old.
Right.
And, so here you are, you're orphan, and who looked after you?
Well, I had been, since when my mother died, her best friend was Marie Harriman, not Pam, but Marie Harriman, who was married to April Harriman. And Mary said, "We'll bring him up to my father, or we've got plenty of room. And I would be very glad to have him live with us and bring him up. So while you're touring around with the band, whenever you can come by." And then my father went into the Navy and obviously was away for a couple of years. So I was brought up totally by the Harriman. And so that's really what happened until, well, not until, but I mean, they were always there.
And you lived on their estate in Harriman, New York, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. You know that place?
Where you grew up. I read that.
Well, have you been up to?
I think I've been to Harriman. It's very beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's very beautiful. And you were at Yale. In your junior year, you went to Paris, didn't you?
I went to Paris for my junior year.
And you, it was almost a Hemingway-like existence. You lived on a barge in the Seine, and you were surrounded by all sorts of literary figures.
You see, I had this godmother called Jenny Chambers, who was a wonderful woman She had a beautiful house in the middle of Paris on the left bank. And she had a fabulous chef, a wonderful butler, a couple of maids. It was just the most opulent, wonderful house. I thought for sure, since she was my godmother, I'd be able to stay there for the year, my junior year, and study, in quotes. And I was looking forward to that. So I was staying there. And about 4 o'clock one morning, she came into my room. And unfortunately, there was a young lady with me in that room. And
I won't ask you her name.
Well,
Why, unfortunately? That sounds pretty fortunate to me.
Well, it was great until the moment that Ginny walked into the door. And then Ginny looked at me and said, I think you've been here long enough. I think you're going to find your own place to live. But she said, was so sweet, she said, you can bring your laundry here. So I used to bring my laundry around about lunchtime so that I could sneak and get some good food. But anyway, she was a wonderful woman. And so I went out and found out that there was a barge, a Thames River barge for sale for $2,500. And I had that. And so I bought this Thames River barge, and it was in the middle of Paris. And I lived on it for a year and a half, and it was heaven. I shared it with Robert Silvers, who was the most wonderful man, who started the New York Review of Books. And he just became my best friend, of course. And George Plimpton came on the barge to introduce me to Silvers and saying, you know, Bob's looking for a place to live and you have an extra room. Could you ever? And I said, sure. I spoke to Bob for 15 minutes and that was it. And so he moved in. It was kind of unusual because he was running the Paris Review at the time. And I had made friends in the Crazy Horse Saloon. You know the Crazy Horse?
Yes, I do. I've even been there.
I thought you had.
Yes.
And,
performers are rather unique.
They are pretty amazing. I made friends with the girls there and told them they could take their breaks on the barge. So they'd come over and smoke a joint or just relax for half an hour. And they'd be there and Bob Silvers would be interviewing Jimmy Baldwin or Thornton Wilder or something. And we'd also, by the way, probably be playing. I had a piano, a rickety piano, and people would just fall by and we'd have jam sessions. It was great. It was
so you had a
really,
piano. You had a piano on the barge.
It was, excuse me.
God bless you.
Thank you. I had an upright piano that was kind of rickety, but we had jam sessions there all the time because we didn't have a phone and there was obviously none of today's, no cell phone. So people had to just come on the barge if they wanted to see it. So they just come on the barge. And if they're musicians, they brought their instruments, we played.
How old were you when you started playing the piano?
When I started, I was 5.
5 years old. And
yeah, my father was in the Far East, and he sent word to the Harrimans that he wanted me to learn the piano. So this lady, rather stout lady, arrived, piano teacher, with a ruler, and she'd hit my hands when I made a bad mistake. And yet she was rather nice, plumply nice. And she was exactly what I didn't want to do. I wanted to play baseball and be outside, whatever. But then I went to Hotchkiss. And when I went there, when I arrived, the guy who was head of the jazz band called me and said, Peter, or got me to come over and said, Peter, would you please play piano with us? And I said, well, I'm not good enough. You know, he said, no, come on. I said, I don't think I want to. And he said, well, let me just say that next week we have a job at the Miss Porter School. And the week after at Emma Willard. And by the way, there were not girls at Hotchkiss at the time. So I immediately accepted to become the pianist. And we had a good little group.
And you did that. Now, from Hotchkiss to Yale, you're playing the piano, and you go into the Army, don't you?
I do.
And
I went into the Army, and well, it was, I took all the exams, and they were, you know, I got 100% in the French exam. And so with typical military logic, they sent me to Panama. And Panama was not that much fun, but it was a lot of, I learned an awful lot there. Learned how to play Latin music, which is beautiful, great. And we went to Cuba, 7 of us, for a couple of days to Americans playing a gig in Cuba, you know, to as goodwill or whatever they called it. We had goodwill. We had a very good time in Cuba. And well, let's see, Panama was very interesting. The thing about Panama with me was that I had met some very interesting and rich Panamanians at a nightclub, actually a restaurant in New York. I was introduced to these people, and I told them I was coming down to Panama. And they said, great, we'll take care of you down there, which made me very happy. And a couple of weeks after I got there, this lady's car drove up to the barracks I was in and offered an invitation to dinner that Saturday. So I went to her house for dinner. There were all these fancy Panamanians. And there was also the top general of the whole theater there, Caribbean theater, whatever it's called. And
he was American or Panamanian?
American, an American general, the big honcho of the whole deal. And he comes over to me, and here I'm a private, and I have my military clothes on. I have my private, whatever, it's obvious. All I had was a name tag that said Duchin. He looked at me and said, are you Duchin? I said, yes, sir. And he said, you play the piano, right? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I want you to play at the Officers Club every weekend. And in return for that, I'll tell you what I'll do. You can live off base, but I want intelligence, because that was just the time that Castro was arriving in Cuba, was taking over in Cuba. And I want intelligence, and I want you to let me know everything you hear, because guys were coming, Cubans were coming through Panama on the way to South America. And I mean, the intelligence I gave him was not terribly important, I don't think, but I love the idea of playing the Officers Club. And he said, oh, by the way, I'll also lend you my fishing boat every other weekend if you want it. So that cinched it. So I went and played at the Officers Club, my first big gig.
First big gig, but there was more to it, because didn't you enter a piano contest while you were in the Army?
Yeah, there was a contest, all Army, yeah, musical contest or something. I won a contest
And you won.
and won. And
what
the
happened
other-
to you?
but the other winner was Steve Lawrence, by the way. And they flew us to New York,
With Edie Gourmet or just you and Steve Lawrence?
me and Steve Lawrence,
Okay.
and not Kim Novak, unfortunately.
Not Kim Novak either.
And they flew us to New York, and we got on the Ed Sullivan show, which
Ed Sullivan.
that was my first big exposure, whatever you call it. I was petrified, shaking.
But you got good reviews.
Well, okay, reviews, yeah.
Yeah, okay reviews, but it was more than okay. Well, what'd you play on the Ed Sullivan show?
Well, I'll tell you, I was absolutely petrified. And of course, Sullivan was very nice. And it was, I guess, just before the Beatles. And I mean, that was a really big show. You remember?
Yeah, I remember that. I
was
saw
huge.
it. Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
Now, you also,
Oh, let me tell you, I'll tell you a story.
love to hear a story.
In Panama, my stepmother, the woman who had married my father, and then he died, was going out with a guy who worked in Mexico City. And I called her because I had a week off and asked her if I could stay with her for a week in Mexico. And she said, absolutely, great, come on up, which I did. But I said to her, her name was Chiquita. I said, Chiquita, I'll stay, I want to stay for a week, but you've got to get me a beautiful date. I mean, really, because I'm in Panama and I'm just dying to see a beautiful woman. I mean, can you help me out? She said, oh, of course I will. Well, the first night, there we are having drinks. Oh, at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock probably, usual Mexican hours. The doorbell rings and a woman wakes. I'm looking like that. My God, here comes my date. And it was my date. And she was about a 75-year-old woman who was beautifully dressed. And I mean, earrings and jewelry and everything. And I look at Chiquita and she said, this is your date, Carmen Lopez Figueroa. She's a wonderful woman. You'll have a great time with her. I thought to myself, my God, what am I supposed to do with this woman? I really couldn't think of why. And I looked at Chiquita with daggers in my eye. We went to dinner, had quite a few drinks, I might say. And this woman could not have been nicer, but I really didn't understand what I was supposed to do with her. I hoped that there were no expectations of any sort. And she said, no, Peter, it's time for us to go. And I said, oh, Christ, where are we? And we go downstairs to her car. And she takes me to just on the outskirts of Mexico City, where there's a large building, very low building. And we go in the front door. And I see there's a long bar and a couple of tables. It's a nightclub. And there are stools on the bar. And over the bar is a picture of a naked woman, like the Naked Maha or something. And she said, well, let's sit at the bar and have a drink. I am still so angry at Chiquita. I can't believe what's happening. I sit down at the bar to have a drink, and 4 of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life come over and grab me and drape themselves over me. And Carmen looked at me and said, well, I just want to say good night to you. She holds out her hand to shake our hand. I shake her hand, and there's a wad of bills in her hand. And I take the wad of bills, and she says to me, Peter, your stepmother says, come back in a few days when you're rested out. And
Pretty good stepmother.
I was in heaven.
Oh, pretty good stepmother.
The nicest thing she ever did to me.
Pretty good stepmother. So another gig you had, of course, you played the White House and you played for kings and queens, but another gig you had was the Black and White Ball, Truman Capote's Black and White Ball.
Right.
And you were what? You were in a tuxedo, so I guess that's black and white.
Sure, yeah.
But tell about that. That was quite an occasion in New York, and people were wearing masks.
But you didn't know it was going to be. It became that. Truman called. I'd known him a little bit. And this little mousy voice called and asked me. He said, Peter, I'm going to give a party. I'd like you to play for him. We arrived at a price, and he said, I don't want you to tell anyone. This is a total surprise. I want it to be total secret. Well, about 3 or 4 days later, I'd had already about 3 calls from columnists saying, I hear you're playing for the Black and White Ball. No. But anyway, Truman was a brilliant self-publicist, as you know, and also a brilliant writer. So I went to play this party, and it was amazing in that it was the first party I'd played at, or that I knew of, that had the really top figures in the society, Vanderbilts and Roosevelts and Harriman, with movie actors and movie actresses and ordinary people. In other words, there was a real mixture, and they were dancing together, and they stayed all night and had a wonderful time. However, there was one, apparently Tallulah Bankhead was dancing with a very good-looking guy all night. She was all over. And apparently Truman told me she called him the next day and said, oh, Truman, you know, that man I was dancing with, he's so wonderful. We had a great night together. He spent the night with me. And Truman said, I am so glad he's my doorman.
Now, you've told us about some of the marvelous highs in your life, which you recount in the book. Maybe you've even told us about some that aren't in the book. But you also have had some devastating lows, and your life has been plagued, sadly, by 2 major illnesses. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about your stroke and then your bout with COVID, 47 days on a ventilator. I mean, it was a nightmare.
A total nightmare.
And how did you deal with it, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I think the stroke was a real crippler. I mean, it hurt my left leg, hurt my left hand. And I mean, it's just what the physical therapy you have to do after something like that is amazing. I mean, you have to pick up pennies. I mean, it's devastating. And, but the physical therapists I work with at New York Hospital were absolutely amazing. I mean, they get their joy out of how well you do. It's really, really amazing. So I thought in this book, one of the things I could talk about was the rehabilitation from a stroke, because I saw quite a few people who had had stroke or a similar thing who had just given up. I mean, they frankly, all they wanted to do was sleep all day. So I threw balls at them, and I'd throw, any plastic things at them, get them, get them interested. And actually, we lined up wheelchairs in it before, getting ready to be chosen by the different instructors. But I wanted to show in this book that you shouldn't give up. You don't have to. There's no need to, difficult as it is. And going on to the COVID thing. So I got through.
Well, just before you get to COVID, a stroke is where you lose the use of your left hand is particularly devastating for a pianist because, as I understand it, I don't know the first thing about it, but as I understand it, the right hand plays the melody and the left hand plays the chords. But you went on to perform.
Yeah.
So how did you do it? How did you manage?
Well, what I do now is the right hand plays fine. The left hand sort of chunks around, and my guitar player plays the chords that I would play with the left hand and fills in like that. And she knows what to do. But I mean, the band said, you sound better than ever. I said, but I didn't use the left hand hardly at all. They said, that's absolutely what we meant. And so, I know, bastard. I must say, that is very difficult. Not being able to play the way I did, or to improve with it. I practice with it, and nothing much happens. It doesn't connect to the mind somehow.
So you're able to perform, and you're performing with your band, and probably very few people in the audience dancing around, very few people in society realize that you're not playing with the chords with your left hand. But then we move on to 2020, and COVID hits, and it affected you in a particularly dramatic and critical way. So please tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I felt extremely tired. I felt I had lost my balance, and we went to the hospital because of it. And it was just the beginning of the COVID thing, and I was diagnosed with COVID. So since it was the beginning, they just had a floor in New York Hospital of just COVID patients. And it was the first time they'd done that. And you couldn't have any guests. Nobody could visit you. No one, because of the COVID. There was a total embargo on that. And I mean,
you couldn't see your wife?
I didn't see my wife for 5 months. And it was pretty difficult. And they had closed the gym because they didn't want meetings of people, groups of people meeting. So it was really difficult getting from the point of not being able to even get out of bed, which I couldn't, to get to the point of using a walker, which, I mean, it's, but you do it or you don't. But I think it certainly makes more sense to do it. Don't you? I mean,
well, consider the alternative. But what do you think really got you through? Was it faith, or was it conviction, or was it determination?
I think it was determination. It was because I have 3 kids I love, and grandchildren, and a wife I love, and I just didn't want to leave them. There was 2 alternatives. One is I could do this and take every opportunity to get better, or just give up and lie back. And that's just not me. I couldn't do that.
And which was the time of introspection, when you had the stroke or when you had COVID, where you're lying in bed and you're thinking about your life?
Absolutely.
you know. Okay, I see Dana has a few questions or a few people on hold. Dana, why are you interrupting this fabulous conversation?
I am so sorry. We do have some questions from our audience. One, Peter, asking if you could expand on your relationship with your father.
Yeah, if I what?
Could expand on your relationship with your father.
Well, my relationship with my father was very limited because he went away in the Army or Navy, excuse me, and he just wasn't home much. So I saw that he loved me, loved me. He didn't have any idea how to be with a kid, but he tried his hardest. I excuse me, I loved him. I thought all the time of the possibility of, wouldn't it be fun if I were playing the piano on a job in one hotel and he'd be down the street at the Waldorf or something. I thought that would be kind of cool. He had no concept of jazz, but he had a wonderful technique. And we never did, we never got to know each other because I was only 12 when he died, unfortunately.
At what age did you know that music was the career path that you wanted to pursue? Almost as if you were destined to pursue it with your father's success. But was there a particular moment or performance that you just knew this is it?
Well, when I got in Hotchkiss and found out that you could get to see girls by playing the piano, I kind of liked the idea of playing the piano. But I guess in Paris, I studied composition and I wanted to be either a composer or a musician. And when I got out of Yale and then out of the Army, I had to make a living. So I formed a band, and that was really when I made my mind up to totally give it to music. I'd always loved music, jazz, classical music, but I tried very hard to do all the wild things that kids do. But I think when I really decided is when I had to do it. And that was when I got out of the Army, I had to make a living, unfortunately.
And what place do you feel the arts play in society?
Tremendous. I think I was vice chairman of the Arts Council for a long time. And I feel the arts play a huge part in society, whatever you call society. I mean, they are a bedrock, let's say, of New York City. If you want to, they bring so many people here, but they do what it does to the spirit. I mean, when I was lying in bed in the hospital, I focused very hard on certain pieces of music that I wanted to explore more than I had done, like the late Beethoven Quartet or Prokofiev sonatas. And that was one of the things that got me through the hospital. You know, I was listening to The Damnation of Faust, which is a piece by Berlioz. And a nurse came in and said, "It's time to take your temperature." I said, "My God, Faust is just being, it's a very important moment for Faust. Hold on just a minute." But And so I had bellowing music coming out of my room. I think, well, I mean, I focus on music then with that answer, but don't forget art, architecture, and of course, poetry, writing. Huge, I mean, they are what you remember of society.
For Jim and Peter, who is your favorite musician or favorite band? Do you have one?
For me, Peter Duchin.
Well, not to be, no,
With his left hand or without his left hand, he always uplifted my spirit. And so if I was to be damned like Faust, I didn't care because the notes and music of Peter Duchin were resonating in my ears.
good Lord. Oh, Mr. Zirin. My favorite pianist is either Bill Evans or Oscar Peterson in the jazz world. And my favorite, it's hard to have a classical favorite musician. I mean, it's Arthur Rubinstein playing Chopin. You know, there's so many good ones.
And final question from the audience. What are you working on now, Peter? What can we expect next from you? Is there another book?
I don't think I'll be working on another book. I think what I'm working on now is, one of the things is getting the word out about not giving up if you have an ailment like COVID or something like that, and trying to help people who have given up by throwing balls at them or something.
I love it. It's incredible.
So I don't really have a particular focus at the moment that you would say, you know, like writing a book or that, but listening to music, reading good books, reading poetry, looking at beautiful paintings, keeping up friendships, having a friendship with Zirin over there.
And we're so thrilled that you were both able to join us. Jim, do you have any other questions for Peter before we wrap up?
I have a final question, which is, you've been through so much, you've accomplished so much, you've suffered so much, it almost breaks your heart to hear it. But what does Peter Duchin see on the other side, having had all these experiences?
In my life?
Yes.
Or politically?
Well, politically. We won't talk politics.
In my life, I'd just like to be a good father, grandfather, husband. I'd like to listen to good music and read good poetry and see good pictures and learn more about that. And the more I learn about music, the more I learn about myself, really, because music is, I think what Marcellus once said, music is me. And I reiterate that. It's him, but it's also me. I want a piece of that.
That's beautiful. The more I learn about music, the more I learn about me. That's, wow. Well, thank you both, Peter and Jim, so much for joining us this evening. It really was our pleasure and our honor to host you. And Peter, congratulations again on this beautiful memoir. Face the Music, everyone. It is out now. It is available for purchase at BookHampton, RJ Julia, and Wesleyan RJ Julia. Thank you all for being with us tonight. And as always, thank you for supporting our local independent bookstores. it means the world to us, and we would not be here without you all. So happy
right.
holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
I hate to let you go. It was so beautiful.
Well, I'll see you later.
I'll see you later.
Take care, everyone.